The Zetharian fleet emerged from hyperspace with the kind of ceremonial grandeur reserved for those who had never known defeat. Admiral Kexthor stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Infinite Dawn, his 4 eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of countless conquests. Behind him stretched a formation of warships, so vast it would take a human eye nearly an hour to count them all. Each vessel was a masterpiece of alien engineering, their hulls adorned with the conquest markings of 17 civilizations that had bent the knee before Zetharian might. They had come to Earth expecting little more than another trophy for their collection, another primitive world to add to their expanding dominion. Kexthor had reviewed the intelligence reports with something approaching amusement. Humanity had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, their earliest colony ships still crawling toward nearby star systems, like infants taking their first steps. Their largest military vessels barely qualified as corvettes by galactic standards. The humans had broadcasted messages of peace and curiosity into the cosmos, naive transmissions that spoke of unity and friendship, of shared knowledge and mutual understanding. Such innocence was almost touching. Almost. But the galaxy was not kind to the innocent, and the Zetharian Empire had not become the dominant force in 3 sectors by respecting the naive hopes of lesser species. The invasion fleet had been assembled as much for show as for necessity. Kexthor's superiors wanted this conquest to serve as a message to other upstart civilizations, a demonstration of what happened to worlds that existed without the Empire's protection. The humans would be given one chance to surrender, to accept their place in the natural order. If they refused, the bombardment would begin. Standard procedure. Clean. Efficient. The Admiral had performed this ritual 43 times before. 43 worlds had looked upon the Infinite Dawn and chosen the wisdom of submission over the futility of resistance. The communication array hummed to life, and Kexthor's translator began processing the incoming human transmission. A woman's face appeared on the view screen, her features composed, but her eyes betraying the calculations happening behind them. She introduced herself as Admiral Jessica Zhao, commander of Earth's 3rd Fleet. 3rd Fleet, Kexthor noted with internal amusement. As if they had enough ships to justify multiple fleet designations. The human spoke with the practiced diplomacy of someone who understood they were outmatched, requesting negotiations, asking for time, all the expected delays that primitives attempted when faced with superior force. Kexthor allowed her to speak. Protocol demanded it, and besides, he found a certain pleasure in watching hope drain from the eyes of those about to be conquered. He explained, in the patient tone one might use with a child, that humanity had 2 choices. They could integrate peacefully into the Zetharian Empire, accepting the guidance and protection of their betters, or they could resist and face the inevitable consequences. He gestured to the view screen showing his fleet, hundreds of warships arranged in perfect formation, each one capable of reducing a city to molten slag in minutes. Surely, he suggested, humanity could see the wisdom of peaceful submission. Admiral Zhao listened without interrupting, her expression never changing. When Kexthor finished his speech, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not the desperate smile of someone grasping at false hope, but the knowing smile of someone holding cards their opponent couldn't see. She thanked Kexthor for his offer and his transparency. She appreciated, she said, that he had been forthcoming about his intentions. It saved everyone a great deal of time. Then she delivered her own message with perfect, crystalline clarity. The Zetharian fleet would leave the solar system immediately, or humanity would interpret their continued presence as an act of war. Kexthor felt his mandibles twitch in what his species considered a laugh. The human's audacity was almost refreshing. He asked, with genuine curiosity, what exactly Earth intended to do if his fleet remained. After all, His sensors detected only a handful of human vessels in the vicinity, primitive constructs that his targeting computers had already marked as negligible threats. Did Admiral Zhao truly believe her species could stand against the might of the Zetharian Empire? Did she understand the futility of her position? The human admiral's smile never wavered. She told Kexthor that humanity had indeed studied his fleet carefully. They had analyzed every ship class, every weapon signature, every tactical formation in the Zetharian arsenal. The intelligence was quite comprehensive. Impressive, even. The Empire clearly took pride in its military traditions. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that perhaps it would be fair to allow the Zetharians the same courtesy. Perhaps they would like to see what they were facing before making any final decisions. She offered to transmit coordinates where the Admiral could observe humanity's response to his ultimatum. Professional courtesy, she called it. One military commander to another. Kexthor considered the request. It was irregular, but harmless enough. If the humans wanted to make a show of their pitiful defenses before surrendering, that was their prerogative. It might even make the eventual submission more palatable to their population. He agreed, and Admiral Zhao transmitted a set of spatial coordinates, a position just beyond the orbit of Mars. She suggested he might want his best sensors active and recording. It would be, she promised, educational. Then she ended the transmission, leaving Kexthor staring at the suddenly blank view screen with the first faint stirring of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. The Zetharian fleet repositioned according to the humans' coordinates, maintaining what Kexthor considered an abundantly cautious distance. His tactical officers had run every simulation they could devise, and none showed any scenario in which humanity posed a credible threat. Still, the human admiral's confidence nagged at him like an old wound before a storm. He had learned, across 4 decades of conquest, to trust his instincts. Something was wrong here, though he couldn't yet identify what. The sensor officer reported unusual readings, massive energy signatures appearing at multiple points throughout the solar system. Whatever the humans were activating, it was big. Very big. Kexthor ordered full spectrum analysis, and his crew scrambled to interpret the data flooding their instruments. The energy patterns were like nothing in their databases, operating on principles that seemed to violate several supposedly fundamental laws of physics. The patterns were old too. The readings suggested infrastructure that had been in place for years, perhaps decades. But that made no sense. Human faster-than-light capability was recent, barely a generation old. Then space itself began to unfold. There was no other way Kexthor could describe what his eyes were witnessing. The fabric of reality rippled and tore, not violently but with surgical precision, as enormous structures began to phase into normal space. They weren't ships emerging from hyperspace. They were something else entirely, something that had been hidden, camouflaged by technology that made them invisible to every sensor in the Zetharian arsenal. The stealth technology alone represented a quantum leap beyond anything the Empire possessed. Kexthor felt his confidence begin to erode as the first massive silhouette resolved on his view screens. It was a fortress, a mobile weapons platform the size of a small moon, bristling with weapon emplacements that made his dreadnought's armament look like a child's toy. The hull was dark, absorbing sensor beams rather than reflecting them, and across its surface ran patterns of light that pulsed with barely contained power. As Kexthor watched in growing horror, more fortresses appeared. Dozens of them, positioned at strategic points throughout the solar system, each one large enough to serve as the centerpiece of an entire battle fleet. They had been here the whole time, invisible, waiting, and humanity had revealed them now as casually as one might show a hand of cards. But the fortresses were only the beginning. Between them, the larger capital ships began to decloak. These were warships built on a scale that defied Kex Thor's understanding of military architecture. The smallest of them dwarfed his flagship, and their weapon ports gaped like the mouths of ancient predators. The humans had designated them with stark, functional names that scrolled across his tactical display. UHNS Vengeance, UHNS Reckoning, UHNS Inevitable, UHNS Testament. Each name was a promise, and Kex Thor was beginning to understand that humanity kept its promises. The fleet composition made no tactical sense according to galactic doctrine. The humans had built their navy around overwhelming firepower rather than maneuverability, around the capacity to project devastating force across impossible distances. Every ship was a siege weapon, designed not for the elegant dance of fleet combat as practiced by civilized species, but for the brutal mathematics of mutual destruction. These were not the ships of a species that had learned warfare from the genteel conflicts of the galactic community. These were the ships of a species that had evolved warfare in isolation, that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing their own kind before turning their attention to the stars. Kex Thor's tactical officer provided an update that confirmed his worst fears. The human fleet now visible in the solar system outnumbered his invasion force by a factor of 3. But numbers were only part of the equation. The energy signatures coming from human weapons systems indicated destructive potential that exceeded Zetharian capabilities by orders of magnitude. They had railguns that could accelerate projectiles to near light speed, particle beam weapons that operated on principles his scientists would need years to understand, missile systems with yields that made his own arsenal look like fireworks. One of those fortresses could probably destroy his entire fleet single-handedly. Humanity had dozens of them. The communication channel opened again, and Admiral Zhao reappeared on his screen. She asked, with perfect politeness, if the Admiral's sensors had finished their analysis. Had the demonstration been sufficiently educational? Did the Zetharian Empire still wish to discuss terms of humanity's surrender? Her tone made it clear that she already knew the answer. Kex Thor found himself unable to speak, his vocal apparatus frozen by the magnitude of his miscalculation. The human admiral allowed the silence to stretch, giving him time to fully comprehend his position. Finally, she spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had anticipated this moment down to the smallest detail. She explained that humanity had known about the Zetharian Empire for considerably longer than the Empire had known about humanity. Earth's early deep space probes had detected signs of galactic civilization decades ago, and humanity had made a decision. They would not announce themselves. They would not send out greetings or invitations. They would watch, and listen, and learn. They would study how the galaxy truly worked, beyond the pretty words of the Galactic Council's charter. And what they learned had convinced them that the universe was not kind to the weak, that peaceful intentions meant nothing without the strength to enforce them. So humanity had built in secret, pouring resources into a military infrastructure that existed in the shadows. They had developed technologies that the galactic community had deemed impossible or impractical. They had designed weapons systems based on the simple principle that if war came, it would be total, and the only acceptable outcome was victory. Every colony ship that left Earth carried not just settlers, but military hardware. Every scientific station doubled as a listening post. Every civilian facility had a hardened military core. Humanity had prepared for the day when someone came to take what was theirs, and they had prepared with the thoroughness of a species that knew the cost of failure. Now that day had arrived, and Admiral Zhao wanted Kex Thor to understand something important. Humanity did not want war. They had hoped, genuinely hoped, that they were wrong about the galaxy. But hope was not a strategy, and humanity had not survived this long by trusting in the goodwill of strangers. The Zetharian Empire had come to Earth expecting submission. They had made the fatal mistake of assuming that a young civilization was a weak one. They were about to learn the difference between a species that had achieved peace through philosophy and one that had achieved it through victory.
Anomaly detected. Rerouting power to shields.
Confirmed. Trajectory adjusted. Monitoring.
Signals expanding. We need to evade.
Engaging.
Small scratches in the metal surface. In his 43 previous conquests, this moment had always belonged to him. He was the one who revealed overwhelming force, who demonstrated the futility of resistance, who offered the choice between survival and annihilation. Now the tables had turned with such completeness that he felt dizzy with the reversal. His invasion fleet, which had seemed so imposing just hours ago, now looked like a collection of toys scattered before a giant. His second officer, a young warrior named Vexril, who had never known defeat, suggested that they attack. The Empire's pride demanded it, he argued. They could not simply retreat before these primitives, regardless of the odds. It would invite chaos, encourage every subject species to question Zetharian superiority. Better to die fighting than to live with the shame of withdrawal. The officer's words carried the hot certainty of someone who had never watched his entire fleet reduced to debris, who had never sent warriors to their deaths knowing the cause was already lost. Kexthor felt a surge of anger at the young fool's bravado, but he kept his voice level. Pride was a luxury afforded to the victorious, he explained. The dead had no use for it. He had not survived 4 decades of military service by confusing honor with suicide. There was nothing honorable about leading his crews into a massacre that would change nothing except the number of families receiving death notifications. The humans had outplayed them, completely and totally. Accepting that reality was not shame. It was wisdom. But even as he spoke, Kexthor's mind raced through tactical possibilities. Perhaps a lightning strike at their command vessels? His fleet's faster-than-light drives were still superior to human technology. They could jump, launch a devastating alpha strike, and escape before the humans could effectively respond. It would be a gamble, but if they could decapitate humanity's leadership, the psychological impact might shift the equation. He was about to order his weapons officers to begin targeting solutions when Admiral Zhao spoke again, and her words froze him in place. She told him that she understood what he was considering. The thought pattern was natural for a military commander in his position. She would be considering the same options in his place. However, she wanted to make something absolutely clear before he committed to a course of action he could never reverse. The ships he could see, the fortresses and dreadnoughts now visible on his sensors, represented approximately 40% of humanity's actual military capacity. The rest remained hidden, distributed throughout human-controlled space, ready to respond to any threat. Moreover, every human vessel was networked into a distributed command structure. There was no single point of failure, no command ship whose destruction would cripple their response. "Kill her," she said with chilling casualness, and 1,000 other commanders would step into her role without missing a beat. Furthermore, she continued, every human vessel was equipped with weapons designed specifically for a last resort scenario. If defeat became inevitable, if a human ship faced certain destruction, it would activate a device that Zhao described as a scorched earth protocol. The ship's reactor would be deliberately overloaded, but not in the conventional sense. Human engineers had found a way to weaponize the fabric of spacetime itself, creating what they clinically termed a localized dimensional cascade. The resulting explosion would tear a hole in reality, a temporary rupture that would consume everything within several 100,000 kilometers. Every human captain had standing orders to activate this protocol rather than allow their vessel to be captured. There would be no prisoners, no salvage, no intelligence to gather from wreckage. Only mutual destruction. Kexthor felt something cold settle in his midsection as he processed this information. The humans had built suicide weapons into every ship. They were willing to kill themselves to deny the enemy any advantage whatsoever. That level of commitment spoke to something fundamental about human psychology, something terrifying in its implications. These were not the tactics of a species that viewed war as an unfortunate necessity or a last resort. These were the tactics of a species that had accepted annihilation as a viable strategic option, that had calculated the mathematics of mutually assured destruction and found them acceptable. Admiral Zhao was still speaking, her tone never losing its professional courtesy. She wanted the Admiral to understand that humanity was not bluffing, not posturing. Every word she had spoken was simple statement of fact, verifiable by his own sensors if he cared to look closely enough at the human ship's power signatures. The dimensional cascade weapons were active, online, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. She was telling him this not as a threat but as a courtesy, one military professional to another. She wanted him to make his decision with full knowledge of the consequences. The Zetharian admiral found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. He asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the human fleet revealed itself. Why? Why had humanity built such overwhelming force? Why had they prepared for war with such totality? They had no enemies, no territorial disputes with other species. They could have announced themselves peacefully, joined the galactic community, and avoided this entire confrontation. Instead, they had chosen to militarize in secret, to build weapons of unprecedented destructive power, to prepare for a war that might never come. What had driven them to such extremes? Admiral Zhao's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Kexthor saw something beyond the tactical calculation in her eyes. Sadness, perhaps, or recognition of a truth she wished was different. She told him that humanity had a saying, ancient words that had survived from their earliest civilizations. Si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. They had watched the galaxy, studied the patterns of conquest and subjugation, seen how the strong preyed upon the weak regardless of the laws and treaties that supposedly governed civilized behavior. They had counted 17 species, like the Zetharians, empires built on the principle that might made right, that the strong had an inherent right to dominate the weak. Humanity had looked at the galaxy and realized that all the noble principles, all the high-minded ideals, all the talk of universal brotherhood meant nothing without the strength to enforce them. They had seen what happened to species that relied on the protection of others, that trusted in laws they could not personally enforce. Those species became subjects, their independence traded for security they might never have needed if they had been strong enough to stand alone. Humanity refused to accept that fate. They would forge their own path, set their own terms, and they would do so from a position of unassailable strength. The human admiral leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Kexthor's with uncomfortable intensity. She told him that humanity had no desire to conquer, no interest in building an empire. They wanted only to be left alone, to develop their civilization according to their own values, to make their own mistakes and achieve their own triumphs. But they had learned, through painful centuries of their own history, that peace was not the natural state of intelligent species. Peace had to be built, maintained, and sometimes defended with force. So they had built that force, had made themselves strong enough that conquest became too costly to contemplate. Kexthor understood then what Admiral Zhao was really saying. Humanity was not like the other species the Empire had subjugated. They were something new, something the Zetharians had never encountered before. A species that had weaponized the very concept of unacceptable cost, that had made themselves so dangerous that attacking them would guarantee a Pyrrhic victory at best and complete annihilation at worst. They had studied the Zetharian Empire's doctrine, understood it completely, and built a military specifically designed to make the doctrine suicidal to employ. The Admiral made his decision. There was no shame in recognizing reality, no dishonor in choosing life over pointless death. He informed Admiral Zhao that the Zetharian fleet would withdraw from human space immediately. There would be no attack, no last desperate gamble for glory. The invasion was over before it had truly begun. Zhao accepted this with a simple nod, her expression suggesting she had never doubted this outcome. She reminded Kexthor that their sensors had recorded everything, that they had full documentation of humanity's military capabilities. She suggested he share this information with his superiors, with the Galactic Council, with anyone who might be considering a similar visit to human space. Transparency served everyone's interests, she noted. It prevented misunderstandings. The Zetharian
All
fleet's
wings form up
withdrawal
on
was
my mark.
executed with military
Engage
precision,
targets at grid 7.
but there was no missing the haste behind the maneuvers. Ships that had arrived in perfect formation departed in functional clusters, prioritizing speed over ceremonial dignity. Kexthor watched the human fleet maintain their positions, not pursuing, not gloating, simply ensuring the invaders left as promised. There was something almost worse about the human restraint, the way they treated this near-apocalyptic confrontation as routine procedure. They had revealed enough to end the conflict, but not so much that other species could fully analyze their capabilities. Every action had been calculated, measured, designed to achieve specific strategic objectives. As his flagship entered hyperspace, Kexthor began composing his report to the High Command. He knew it would be received with skepticism, perhaps even accusations of cowardice. The Empire's leadership had built their power on the certainty of Zetharian military superiority, and what he was about to tell them would shatter that certainty completely. But the sensor logs would confirm every word. The energy signatures, the weapon yields, the technological sophistication, all of it was documented in exacting detail. The humans had wanted it recorded, had encouraged comprehensive analysis. They wanted the galaxy to know what awaited anyone foolish enough to threaten Earth. His communication with the capital was as difficult as anticipated. The High Command's initial response was disbelief, then anger, then a dangerous determination to test humanity's defenses with a proper military expedition. Kexthor spent hours in tense communication, presenting evidence, analyzing tactical scenarios, explaining again and again that attacking humanity would be the Empire's final act. The humans had not been bluffing. They had built a military infrastructure capable of fighting the entire galactic community simultaneously, and they had done so with the grim efficiency of a species that knew extinction was the alternative to victory. Finally, after reviewing the complete sensor data, the High Command began to accept reality. The Strategic Council convened an emergency session, summoning military advisors and xenopsychology experts to analyze what humanity represented. The conclusion they reached was sobering. Humans were not like other species the Empire had encountered. They did not think of warfare as a regrettable necessity or a tool for limited political objectives. They thought of it as an existential equation with only two acceptable outcomes: total victory or mutual annihilation. There was no middle ground in human military philosophy, no concept of negotiated settlement once weapons were drawn. The xenopsychologists presented a theory based on humanity's evolutionary history. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, predators who succeeded not through speed or strength, but through relentless, patient pursuit. They had spent hundreds of thousands of years hunting prey across vast distances, following wounded animals for days until exhaustion claimed them. That same mindset informed their approach to warfare. They did not expect quick victories or elegant solutions. They expected grinding, total conflicts that would test every resource, every innovation, every ounce of determination they possessed. And they prepared accordingly. Moreover, humanity's own history was a catalog of increasingly destructive conflicts. They had fought each other with stone and bronze, iron and steel, explosives and nuclear fire. They had developed weapons capable of rendering their own planet uninhabitable, had stared into the abyss of self-annihilation, and had somehow managed to step back from the brink. But they had not forgotten the lessons learned. They knew, with visceral certainty, that the only thing preventing war was the certainty that war would be too costly for anyone to survive. So they had extended that principle to the galactic stage, making themselves too dangerous to attack, too costly to conquer. The High Command issued new directives. Human space was to be considered a no-contact zone. No Zetharian vessel would enter the solar system or any human colony without explicit permission. Trade relationships could be established through neutral intermediaries, but direct military interaction was forbidden. The Empire would find easier conquests elsewhere, species that did not possess the technological sophistication or the psychological willingness to accept mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome. Humanity would be left alone, not out of respect but out of pragmatic calculation. The cost of subjugating Earth was simply too high. But the implications extended far beyond the Zetharian Empire. News of the confrontation spread through the galactic community with the speed of scandal. Other species that had contemplated expansion into human space quietly revised their plans. The Galactic Council debated how to integrate this new power into the existing framework of interstellar politics. Some argued that humanity's military buildup violated the spirit, if not the letter of First Contact protocols, that they should face sanctions for their secrecy and militarization. Others, particularly species that had suffered under the domination of larger empires, saw humanity as a potential ally, a counterweight to the traditional power structures. Admiral Zhao found herself at the center of a diplomatic whirlwind she had neither sought nor particularly wanted. Ambassadors from dozens of species requested meetings, seeking to establish relationships, to understand human intentions, to ensure they were not on the receiving end of humanity's military might. She handled each interaction with the same professional courtesy she had shown Kexthor, making Earth's position clear. Humanity wanted peaceful coexistence, wanted to contribute to the galactic community, wanted to share in the accumulated knowledge of the stars. But they would do so as equals, never as subjects, and they would maintain the military strength to ensure that equality was respected. Some species found humanity's stance refreshing, a blunt honesty that cut through the diplomatic doublespeak that characterized galactic politics. Others found it threatening, a challenge to the established order that had kept relative peace for centuries. A few, the more thoughtful observers, recognized that humanity had changed the fundamental equation of interstellar relations. The galaxy had operated on certain assumptions about military power, about the correlation between technological advancement and force projection. Humanity had demonstrated that those assumptions were wrong, that a young species with sufficient motivation could leapfrog centuries of conventional development. The technological implications were equally significant. Human innovations in weapons design, stealth technology, and power generation represented quantum leaps beyond accepted galactic capabilities. Research institutions across known space began analyzing the limited data available from the confrontation, trying to understand the principles behind human achievements. Some of it was theoretically possible but economically impractical by galactic standards. Humans had simply been willing to pour resources into military development on a scale that other species considered irrational. Other achievements seemed to violate established physics, suggesting that humanity had discovered principles that the wider galactic community had missed or dismissed. Kexthor, his career effectively ended by the failed invasion, found himself in an unexpected role. The High Command assigned him to head a new research initiative studying human military doctrine and technology. His experience made him uniquely qualified to understand the human mindset, and his tactical expertise was needed to develop potential counters to human capabilities. Not for immediate use, the directive carefully specified, but for theoretical contingencies. The Empire needed to understand how to fight humans if circumstances ever demanded it, even if they never intended to test that knowledge. As he delved deeper into human military history, Kexthor developed a grudging respect for Admiral Zhao and her species. They had done what he had always believed impossible. They had engineered a strategic position where attack guaranteed defeat, where the only winning move was not to play. They had made themselves so dangerous that aggression became irrational, and they had done so without firing a shot. That took a kind of strategic genius he had not encountered before, a willingness to commit utterly to a course of action and accept all its implications. 6 months after the confrontation, Admiral Zhao stood in the observation deck of the UHMS Valiant, watching as the first official Galactic Council delegation prepared to dock. The meeting had taken this long to arrange, with both sides carefully negotiating protocols, security arrangements, and agenda items. Humanity was about to join the wider interstellar community, but on their own terms, from a position of strength that no new species had ever achieved before. The humans had proven they could not be ignored or intimidated. Now they would discover if they could be integrated. The delegation included representatives from 23 species, a carefully balanced selection designed to represent the diversity of galactic civilization. There were scientists eager to exchange knowledge, diplomats trained in the delicate art of negotiation, and military observers, whose role was ostensibly ceremonial, but whose keen eyes would be assessing every detail of human capabilities. Zhao had spent weeks preparing for this moment, reviewing briefings on galactic culture, studying the complex web of alliances and rivalries that shaped interstellar politics, learning which topics were safe and which could trigger diplomatic incidents. The meeting began with formal greetings, each species presenting credentials according to their own traditions. Humanity responded with measured courtesy, neither obsequious nor arrogant, striking the balance between respect for galactic customs and confidence in their own position. Admiral Zhao delivered a prepared statement outlining humanity's goals: peaceful coexistence, mutual exchange of knowledge, participation in galactic institutions as equals, and absolute sovereignty over human-controlled space. Nothing controversial, but the emphasis on equality and sovereignty carried unmistakable weight given recent events. The response from the galactic representatives was mixed but generally positive. Most species recognized that humanity's approach, while unconventional, had prevented what could have been a catastrophic war. The Zetharian invasion would have proceeded according to established patterns if humanity had been as weak as assumed, and countless lives would have been lost in the resulting conflict. By revealing their strength proactively, humans had actually prevented violence rather than causing it. This argument did not satisfy everyone, particularly species that benefited from the current power structure, but it provided diplomatic cover for those seeking accommodation. The real negotiations began when discussion turned to military transparency. Several species argued that humanity's continued secrecy about their full capabilities represented a destabilizing factor in galactic politics. How could treaties be negotiated, they asked, when one party refused to fully disclose their military strength? Humanity's response, delivered by Zhao with careful precision, was that military secrecy was standard practice across the galaxy. Every species maintained classified weapons programs, undisclosed capabilities, strategic reserves. Humanity was simply being honest about the fact of secrecy rather than pretending to transparency while hiding capabilities. Moreover, Zhao argued, humanity had already revealed more about their military capabilities than was strictly necessary. They had shown enough to prevent unnecessary conflicts, to make clear that attacking Earth would be catastrophically expensive. Demanding full disclosure went beyond legitimate security concerns and entered the realm of intelligence gathering. Humanity would participate in standard verification protocols for weapons of mass destruction, would abide by treaties governing conduct of war, would accept the same transparency requirements applied to other galactic powers. But they would not unilaterally disarm or provide enemies with detailed tactical intelligence. The discussion evolved into a broader debate about the nature of military power in the galactic community. For centuries, military strength had been roughly correlated with age and technological development. Older species had better weapons, larger fleets, more sophisticated defenses. This created a natural hierarchy that younger species either accepted or rebelled against to their detriment. Humanity had broken that pattern, demonstrated that innovation and commitment could overcome the advantages of age. Some species saw this as dangerous destabilization. Others saw it as long overdue disruption of an unjust system. A representative from the Vexnari collective, a species that had maintained independence through a combination of diplomacy and defensive capability, spoke in support of humanity's approach. They argued that the galaxy had become complacent, too accepting of might makes right principles that contradicted the stated values of the Galactic Council. Humanity's emergence as a military power despite their youth was a reminder that strength came in many forms, that innovation could trump experience, that determination mattered as much as resources. The collective proposed that humanity's example might actually promote peace by demonstrating that conquest was becoming economically and militarily untenable. Not everyone agreed with this optimistic assessment. A Krell strategist, speaking with the blunt directness characteristic of his species, pointed out that humanity's weapons development had focused heavily on destructive capacity rather than defensive systems. This suggested an offensive rather than defensive mindset, a species preparing not just to resist attack, but to project power beyond their borders. What guarantee could humanity offer that their current peaceful intentions would remain stable? What prevented them from becoming the next great conqueror once they felt sufficiently secure? Admiral Zhao addressed this concern head-on. She acknowledged that human weapons were indeed designed for maximum destructive potential, but explained that this reflected human military philosophy. Humanity did not believe in half measures. If war came, it would be total, and the only acceptable outcome was victory. But that very commitment to totality made war less likely, not more. Humans understood, with visceral clarity, what total war meant. They had experienced it in their own history, had seen cities reduced to ash, had developed weapons capable of destroying their own civilization. That knowledge informed their current approach, strength sufficient to make war irrational, coupled with diplomatic engagement to ensure war never became necessary. The negotiations continued for 3 days, working through dozens of specific issues. Trade protocols, scientific exchange programs, territorial boundaries, dispute resolution mechanisms, military communication channels to prevent accidents or miscalculations. Progress was slow but steady, with both sides demonstrating willingness to compromise on peripheral issues while maintaining firm positions on core interests. By the end, a framework agreement had emerged that satisfied no one completely but provided everyone with enough to justify participation. Humanity would join the Galactic Council as a probationary member, with full membership possible after a period of demonstrated adherence to Council principles. Human ships would be allowed to traverse established trade routes, subject to the same regulations applied to other species. Scientific exchanges would begin immediately, with both sides sharing knowledge in fields of mutual interest. Military communication protocols would be established to prevent accidental conflicts. Territorial boundaries would be respected, with a buffer zone around human space where other species would not establish military installations. But perhaps most significantly, the agreement included language proposed by the Vexnari collective and supported by humanity. It acknowledged the right of all species to maintain military forces sufficient for their defense, without defining what sufficient meant or requiring disclosure of specific capabilities. This represented a subtle but important shift in galactic policy, moving away from the assumption that military strength should be proportional to age or size toward recognition that each species must determine their own security needs. As the galactic delegation departed, Admiral Zhao reflected on how completely the situation had evolved from that first tense confrontation with Admiral Kexthor. Humanity had achieved its primary objective: recognition as a sovereign power that would be neither conquered nor dominated. But the process had revealed complexities she had not fully anticipated. The galaxy was not simply divided between aggressors and victims, conquerors and conquered. It was a web of overlapping interests, historical grievances, strategic calculations, and genuine efforts at peaceful coexistence. Humanity would have to navigate this web carefully, maintaining the strength that ensured their independence, while building the relationships that would make that independence meaningful. Word of the agreement spread across human space, greeted with relief by some and concern by others. Citizens who had lived through the mobilization, who had watched resources diverted to military production, wondered if the threat was truly over or if this was merely a pause before greater conflicts. Military officers, who had devoted careers to preparing for war without fighting it, wondered what role they would play in this new era of cautious engagement. Scientists and explorers, who had been recruited into weapons development, wondered if they could return to pure research. Admiral Zhao addressed these concerns in a broadcast that reached every human habitat. She explained that the agreement with the Galactic Council was a beginning, not an ending. Humanity had secured recognition and respect, but maintaining that position would require continued vigilance and continued strength. The military buildup would not stop, though its pace might slow. Research into advanced weapons and defensive systems would continue, because the galaxy remained a dangerous place and humanity's security depended on staying ahead of potential threats. But this effort would be balanced with renewed emphasis on exploration, on scientific advancement, on building the civilian infrastructure that had been somewhat neglected during the military emergency. She spoke of the future with measured optimism. Humanity had proven they could stand as equals with species that had centuries or millennia of head start. They had demonstrated innovation and determination that commanded respect. Now they had the opportunity to contribute to galactic civilization, to share human perspectives and values, to learn from accumulated wisdom while teaching what they knew. The road ahead would not be easy. Prejudices would persist, conflicts would arise, misunderstandings would occur. But humanity would face these challenges from a position of strength, as architects of their own destiny rather than subjects of someone else's empire. In the months and years that followed, humanity's integration into galactic society proceeded with cautious momentum. Trade relationships developed, bringing exotic goods and new technologies to human space while opening markets for human innovations. Scientific collaborations produced breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. Cultural exchanges introduced humans to art forms and philosophical traditions that expanded their understanding of what intelligent life could achieve. Slowly, carefully, humanity began to find its place among the stars. But the military infrastructure remained, a constant reminder of the price of independence. Every colony ship still carried weapons. Every civilian station still had hardened military corps. The massive fortresses that had been revealed during the confrontation with the Zetharians remained on station, visible now, but no less formidable. New vessels joined the fleet regularly, each incorporating lessons learned and technologies developed. Humanity had not forgotten what brought them respect, and they would not allow themselves to become vulnerable through complacency. Admiral Zhao eventually retired from active service, though she remained involved in strategic planning as a civilian consultant. She had become the face of humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage, the commander who had faced down an invasion without firing a shot. But she insisted, whenever asked, that she was simply implementing a strategy developed by thousands of people over decades. The victory, if it could be called that, belonged to humanity as a whole. The engineers who had built impossible ships, the scientists who had discovered new principles, the politicians who had maintained secrecy and focus, the citizens who had accepted sacrifices without knowing the full reason why. Looking back on those pivotal days, Zhao recognized that humanity had been extraordinarily fortunate. If the Zetharians had attacked without warning, if they had not offered a chance for demonstration, if they had not been willing to accept logic over pride, the confrontation could have ended very differently. Billions might have died. Human civilization might have been crippled or destroyed. The strategy of deterrence through overwhelming force only worked if the other side was rational enough to be deterred. Humanity had gambled that the Zetharians valued survival more than pride, and that gamble had paid off. But the deeper truth, the one that kept Zhao awake some nights, was that humanity had fundamentally changed themselves in the process of preparing for war. They had become harder, more militaristic, more willing to accept terrible costs in pursuit of security. The question that haunted her was whether they could maintain that edge while still preserving the curiosity, the idealism, the fundamental humanity that had driven them to the stars in the first place. Could they be both warriors and explorers, both pragmatic defenders and dreamers of better futures? Time would tell. The galaxy had thought humanity would be impressed by battleships, that a show of force would be enough to secure submission. They had been wrong. Humanity had built their own battleships, bigger and deadlier than anything the Zetharians could imagine. But the real victory was not in the ships themselves, but in what they represented. The unwavering determination of a species that refused to accept domination, that would pay any price and bear any burden to remain free. The Zetharians and others had learned that lesson. Now humanity would discover what freedom truly meant among the stars, and whether the strength they had built to secure it would define them or serve them in the challenges ahead.